All right. Good morning, everybody. We're on a minute early here. This is Mark McWilliams from Arista Winery. Our winemaker, Matt Courtney. You want to say anything, Matt?
Hello, everybody. Nice to be with you.
Give everyone a minute or two to hop on as we suffer through another rough day here in Sonoma County. Hope everybody's doing well out there. I see some people coming on now. I know that we'll probably be a little dark, but that's just kind of how this is. So, and I hope if audio is good too. I think we all sound great there. So maybe wait another minute or so to get on. You got any jokes, Matt?
Nothing appropriate for a general audience.
All right. So, it's an honor to get to be on with Wilson Daniels and the chance to visit with everyone a little bit today. The thought for Matt and me with this Instagram Live, when we come into the market, and it's not often that Matt gets to come into the market. He makes a couple of trips a year, but when we're in, we tend to have limited amounts of time with each one of you guys when we visit. And so we thought this might be a fun way to dive a little bit deeper into Matt's background, maybe talk about some of the influences, mentors that he has in the business, just some basic background information. Please, if you have any questions, fire away. Kim is off camera. She's going to be looking at questions, and if we can work them in, we'll work as many in as we possibly can. But just a chance to kind of visit a little bit with Matt and give some background. We'll taste a couple of wines. Some of the 2018 wines are just getting into the market, and so thought it would be a great opportunity to talk about a couple of the wines that we're really proud of and want to highlight. And then if we have time, maybe spend a couple minutes talking about the 2020 vintage. I don't know about you guys, but 2020 has been pretty quiet and calm around here. Just kidding. So maybe spend a couple minutes talking about that. So let's hop in. So Matt joined us in 2013. His first vintage with Arista was 2013. So we're now going on to 7 or 8 years together. And I think in that time, we have really evolved as a brand. But I think it might be interesting to kind of start even before that with just such a softball, easy question. How did you get into wine? Was it a aha, one bottle rocked my world moment? Was it gradual over time? And how did you kind of transition through college into making wine?
Yeah. Well, I was born in Meridian, Mississippi, which
hotbed of winemaking,
as everybody knows, all you guys know who are wine pros. Super exciting spot for food and wine. But so yeah, I was born in Mississippi, but my family moved to California within about 6 months after I was born. Went to UC Berkeley, and didn't really grow up in a real gourmand kind of a family. Mm-hmm. We grew up sort of lower middle class. There was certainly wine on the table, but it was in a box, for the most part. My dad liked ice cold Coors banquet beers,
Nothing wrong with that.
I can still remember what a ice cold Coors tastes like right out of the fridge in 1974. I can literally remember that taste, But no, so just being in Berkeley, I graduated high school in '89, so being in Berkeley in the early '90s, it was a pretty cool time for food and wine. The East Bay was kind of booming with not only just ethnic food, but fine dining and everything in between. So I really just, as a student, just started working in restaurants.
Yep.
to earn a little extra money. almost by accident, my roommate was a line cook at the local hoagie shop in Berkeley. And so
far I'm hearing Coors Light, Mississippi, and hoagie. I promise there's a plot twist coming here.
So, yeah, I think he was like over it one day. He was he's leaving his prestigious position as the line cook at the hoagie shop, and he's like, you should take the job. It's a pretty good job. So I did. I took it, and so I made hoagies and cheesesteaks for about 6 months. That was my entree into the food and wine world. But as any of you guys know who've been in the food and wine business for a long time, you sort of just gravitate upwards.
Yep.
The money's better as you work in nicer places. You kind of catch the bug maybe, and you sort of are interested in learning more. So, and that's what happened to me. I graduated to like the pub in town. That was my next step. And then at one point I was ready for something new, and my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife, Angela, she's like, well, there's a restaurant like across the street, I think it's kind of nice, you should check that out maybe, And so I was like, okay. I had super long hair at the time. I cut my hair, walked across the street on like a Tuesday, and rolled into this restaurant. I was like, hey, I'm looking for a job. Are you guys hiring,
And the name of that restaurant was?
Well, yeah, that's the punchline. Yes. So that ended up being Chez Panisse.
Plot twist?
Yeah, so someone had like just quit, that morning, and the manager at the time, Peter, was like, well, can you start tonight? And I was like, yeah. And so that was my introduction to fine dining. Was
so I'd assume at Chez Panisse, then you have exposure to obviously a world famous chef, world famous cuisine. Now the wine list has probably improved from the college pub to Chez Panisse. So kind of one of my earlier questions, was it a one wine moment? Was it I'm serving all these great wines and I'm getting to try or ask questions about those wines? Kind of what was that evolution into wine?
Yeah, well, so obviously, well, not obviously, but that was certainly my first experience working in fine dining.
Mm-hmm.
My parents had taken us out to nice dinners occasionally growing up, but I'd never really gotten the full exposure, I never worked at a fine dining restaurant. And so I worked there for a couple years, and it really certainly introduced me to that world at a really high level. Mm-hmm. I would say I was still fairly young, and I don't think I can say I was committed to making a life in food and wine at that point. Mm-hmm. I would say during that time I had an amazing education, working with Alice Waters, and the food is inspirational. Mm-hmm. Even if you are a novice, you can't help but be inspired. The wine program was perfectly tailored to the food. There weren't a lot of huge blue chip wines on the list, but it was really thoughtful.
Yep.
And so that was it was a perfect introduction to food and wine, and it was a great environment to start to catch the bug.
Yep.
After the couple years, my girlfriend and I moved out to Wyoming, of all places.
And that's what I was going to kind of connect the dots. So I know that at Berkeley, you skied. You were on the ski team, right? And so kind of ski bum, you have the chance to move to Wyoming, Jackson Hole. Right. Certainly not for wine or food. It was the opportunity to ski. But as fate would have it, you stumble into another restaurant job, which really was, because I know the backstory here, I would say was really the catalyst into your wine career. So maybe talk about kind of what happened in Wyoming, the restaurant, and the people that you worked with there.
Yeah. So we moved to Jackson. as you say, my wife and I met on the ski team. She grew up in Slovenia, where the national sport is ski racing. I grew up ski racing. So when we graduated from Berkeley, we had this kind of dream of just at least doing a season somewhere cool, like somewhere like Jackson Hole. So we moved out there just sort of to do it. 4 years later, we're still there. To sort of again fund our passion to spend some time just being ski bums, it became clear that you didn't want to work on the mountain, where you're really at work when you're supposed to be having fun skiing. Right. You want a restaurant job so that you can ski during the day. Right. So I basically continued to work in restaurants out there. Worked in a few restaurants. The sort of restaurant I think of as the most important for me was a restaurant called Terroir.
Yep.
Which was a really cool, very small bistro-style restaurant with probably 15 tables, and like a $5 million wine list. It was
priorities.
It was a total anomaly. I mean, as everyone knows, Jackson Hole is kind of many wealthy people have homes in Jackson Hole. Yep. Because it's a very positive place for tax reasons. And it's an amazingly beautiful place as well. So there's lots of wealthy people who want nice places to eat, and that in the late '90s really spawned this sort of revolution in food and wine in Jackson, whereas before it was kind of a cowboy town. Now it was like becoming a real serious food and wine destination. So
you've got this small bistro, you've got a $5 million wine list, there's 15, 20 tables, and from what I know, out of that small group of people, you kind of had a leader who went on to do some pretty good stuff, and then there were other staff members who've gone on in the wine business. So maybe just kind of quickly, who was that guy, and then who came from that group?
Yeah, so the sort of managing partner of this restaurant was a man named Ken Fredrickson, who's a good friend of mine. Certainly, I would say a mentor of mine, and someone I credit with really igniting the spark of working with Ken and working at that restaurant was the time that made me want to be a food and wine professional.
And at the time, Ken was not a master yet. Is that correct? Or was he?
He was still in advanced. Yep. He went on to become the youngest master sommelier ever at the time. So obviously, it was a lot of excitement in the restaurant. Small restaurant. We had the youngest master sommelier in the world. He's a very, him. He's a really energetic, very inspirational guy.
Yep.
And he kind of that was just contagious for all of us who worked there. The small staff that it was, we all caught the bug in a big way.
Yep.
We all passed. He brought the introductory level course of the Court of Master Sommeliers to Jackson, Wyoming, of all places.
Yep.
And everyone at the restaurant passed the first level, which is pretty cool to have everyone in the restaurant that into wine. That's the moment. And I remember you asked about special bottles. There were so many at that restaurant.
I can imagine.
We all know, all of us, and especially who are professionals, know as a person coming up and a young person, it's very difficult, of course, to find ways to get exposed to these great wines of the world. I mean, obviously they're expensive,
right.
And so finding whether it's a mentor, some kind of a benefactor, some kind of a special wine tasting group, some way to get access to those wines and to get exposure to those wines is so critical. And for me, it was this restaurant and Ken's generosity and Ken's excitement that
propelled you.
That really propelled me, and from that moment on, it was sort of a light bulb that went off where I wanted to make a career in wine.
So kind of jumping ahead to just for the sake of time, I know that you left there, went to Europe, spent some time, more transformative time in Europe, came back to the U.S., went back to school, got your degree from UC Davis in winemaking, kind of made this career decision where instead of pursuing the SOM track, service track, you decided to go into winemaking and production. So you come back, you go through, you get your degree, and your first gig, you're talking about a guy who gets all the breaks here, your first gig coming out of school, you're a newly minted winemaker, and you land a job working for...
So yeah, through mutual friends, I got to know Helen Turley
right.
A little bit. So she at the time was still making quite a bit of Cabernet, still consulting quite a bit in Napa, but had started Marcassin, the Pinot Noir and Chardonnay project on the Sonoma coast. Their sort of main winemaker was leaving, and so they were searching for the replacement, and again through friends of friends, we met, and we hit it off pretty well. I was still at Davis actually at the time, but they're both very, very intellectual, scholarly people, and so they both, I think, appreciated the fact that I'd been a philosophy major at Berkeley.
Right.
John, her husband, was a philosophy PhD, so they liked that, and I don't think they interviewed anybody else.
Yeah.
They literally, we had a couple meetings, we drank some wine, and I'll never forget, it was one of these moments where I'm walking through campus like the week before I graduated, and my phone rings, and the caller ID is Helen Turley. I was like, that was pretty cool.
So how many years did you end up staying at Marcassin?
So I was there for 8 years.
Okay. And so you kind of talked about, I know that Helen was a huge influence and a mentor for you. I know you talked about Ken Fredrickson. Any other mentors that shaped kind of wine philosophy or approach in the wine world or even outside of the wine world? Just people that you, maybe they're direct mentors, or people that maybe you don't know, but you really aspire or are inspired by?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of mentors, I would say kind of how we've covered, I would point to Alice Waters, Ken Fredrickson, and Helen Turley for sure.
Yeah. I presume our relationship's too young for me to be a mentor at some point. Yeah. Well,
and then Mark McWilliams.
Of course. Okay.
Of course. I thought that was just
implied.
That was implied. Okay. In terms of inspiration, absolutely. Inside and outside of the wine industry, I mean, all of us who are in this, I think, are in it because we've been inspired by many people in the industry and outside of it. Inside, there's so many people, of course, that I respect the wines of. I would point to people like, Frederic Meunier. He's a friend, and I really respect him and his wines. I think he told me one time his favorite thing that anyone's ever said about him was a critic once said that the hand of the winemaker is almost imperceptible in his wines. And he was so proud of that.
High praise.
And the fact that he was so proud of that really struck me, and I totally, it resonated with me, and I feel like I'm trying to get there as well.
So let's go there. So kind of like, I'm going to pivot on that, and if we talk about like philosophy or approach as a winemaker, then one of the things that I've come to know about you in the past 7 or 8 years is that you are very thoughtful, you're very meticulous, you're very calculated in the way you make decisions, And we joke sometimes. I mean, you and I are always talking about these types of things. I'm like, rah, 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 let's go, let's try making this variety, or let's do this. And you're a much slower, more calculated person. And at first it was like, dude, this guy is absolutely unwilling, unbending in his approach or philosophy. But what I've come to know about you over time is that it's actually the opposite, that you're very open-minded to change or ideas, but that your approach is a very measured approach, right? And so I would say that from the time that you spent with Marcus and prior to us, and then even when you started with us, to the most recent vintage, which is in barrel, the 2019 vintage, I would assume that your philosophy or your approach has evolved over time. You know, that's 20-ish years right there. Talk a little bit about that. Just kind of, I know it's a hard one for winemakers to talk about what your general philosophy is, but like, what are some kind of bullet point things that you would tell people just philosophically you feel about wine? And then part two of that question is, what are some changes you can point to that you've made, if you've made any, between 2013, your first vintage at Arista, and maybe what you did in the 2019 vintage? So, big question, but I think meaty.
So, yeah, answer is less but better.
Uh-huh.
Next question.
There we go. I like it. See there? He never does that.
Less but better. You know, it's something that we've talked about many over.
It is
and
a
over
phrase
again.
that we use all the time philosophically around here. Is fewer things but better things. Fewer inputs, better inputs.
So, minimalism
Yep.
is a big driver for me, for sure. Anyone who's ever seen my office
Spartan
knows that. There's a desk and a laptop and a chair.
Yes.
And literally that's it.
Nothing on the walls, no pictures. Yeah.
Picture my kids.
Yeah, that's true. And wife. You got it.
But this sort of like search for paring away the unnecessary and the superfluous.
Yep.
Is a big driver for us. Kind of this guiding principle of looking for with trying not to be too cheesy, but the core principle or the core value of any of these sites that we work with. And back to what you alluded to, for me that takes a lot of time. And everyone knows, we only get one shot at making wines from these vineyards every year. So even over a course of a 20-year period, you've only made, you've only had 20 chances
to do this.
So for me, it's a long learning process. But as you say, I am very careful about how I approach things, and so I think the wines, if there's I think there is an evolution in the style. There has to be, in my opinion. Anyone who thinks they know everything about winemaking, has to be fooling themselves.
Or just settles into one kind of recipe and basically vintage in, vintage out, whatever. You just kind of click to that. I don't think that doesn't really jive, I think, with what we are trying to do.
And something I really, I think back to my time with Helen. It's one of the most important things I think she taught me was, they, even with all their success and, being toward the end of their career, were still very adamant that they get better every year. Yeah. They were never satisfied.
Yep.
They never rested on their laurels or were, basked in the glow of all their success or ratings. They didn't care about that.
Right.
All they cared about was making better wine next year.
Next vintage.
Better wine.
Yeah.
It was like kind of shocking to me that was such an intense focus for them.
Yeah.
And so it stayed with me. And so that's what we do in the cellar, is we're constantly looking for ways to improve. As you've noticed, it's never like, okay, that didn't work last year, let's throw all that out and try this over here. It's always looking for incremental gains and getting better, more detailed in these very specific ways.
Yeah.
And that kind of radiates through everything from what we do in the vineyard, growing, to what we do in the cellar, and everything in between. So,
okay, I'm gonna one quick answer here, and then I want to taste a little bit of wine, but kind of magically. And here's another thing about Matt that you guys don't know. So, he is laser focused on making Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, and so from time to time we joke about bringing in new varietals, and he gives me this long blank stare and this very uneasy chuckle, and then is like, no. So we say very focused on Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, and that's great. I think that's kind of part of what he brought to us is this laser focus. But we do all kind of daydream, fantasize about if you could make another variety from another region. Is there a dream it would be fun one day to get to make X from X?
It was, obviously, Burgundy is something that would be fun.
Pinot Noir and Chardonnay.
Just because of the obvious. I've always loved the wines from northern Italy.
Yeah.
As you know, so that would be very cool to. I don't know how it happened in reality.
Yeah.
If it ever could, to make wines in Barolo or Barbaresco would be amazing. Those are some of the wines I really I've always appreciated and enjoy. They are, you talk about like inspirations in wine and outside of wine. So it's always been interesting for me because Nebbiolo is in a way very close to Pinot Noir.
Yeah.
And at the same time quite different. So those wines for me, they're close enough to Pinot where it's almost like I can get inspiration inside of the Pinot diaspora, but they're different enough that I don't have to like compare those wines directly with mine. I can let go a little bit and just enjoy the wine for what it is. So it's kind of a perfect region, a perfect variety for me, because it's close enough but not too close.
Yeah.
So that would probably be number one. They're probably tied.
Fair enough.
Burgundy and Barolo are
shoot high,
tied.
baby. Shoot high.
Yeah.
All right. So, if we can, I want to spend just a couple minutes and taste with Matt from the 2018 vintage. The 2018s are in the market. What we wanted to focus on are two wines, a Chardonnay and a Pinot Noir. Our single vineyard wines we're very fortunate, tend to get a lot of great publicity, attention. There's a large following for them, and that's exciting. It's why we make those wines. About 4 years ago, we made an internal decision, commitment, focus with our appellation wines to spend a lot more time thinking about them and pivot away from looking at the appellation line of wines as like village level, entry level, maybe sourced from younger or lesser vineyards to protect a margin, maybe using some leftover barrels that didn't quite fit into the single vineyards to go into the appellation wines. That was maybe kind of a previous approach. Starting in 2014, we really began to look at the appellation wine more as a tête de cuvée. So this is a blend of the reserve wines, forgetting kind of entry level or lesser fruit to go into a less expensive bottle of wine. Why not instead turn that upside down and take your best fruit, blend it together at an entry level? And we have had tremendous success around the country with the appellation wine. Just blown away by some of the restaurants that have gotten behind these wines as a high-end, like by the glass, or certainly just list placements. Selfishly, I do think that put against anyone's appellation wines in the U.S., I really do think that they are phenomenal values. So we have the 2018 Russian River Valley Chardonnay and the 2018 Russian River Valley Pinot Noir, and I'll pour them for you. I thought maybe just a minute, because we don't have too much more time, but just like some high notes. 2018 for me was, this is my 20th vintage, one of my favorite vintages that I've been around. It really was a special year, but maybe talk about just some of the high points of the vintage.
No, I agree. I think 2018's a special vintage. It's particularly interesting because it's coming on the heels of what I would call the drought period.
Yep.
So we're talking about 2012, especially 2012 through 2015. Mm-hmm. Obviously, severe drought in California, and then followed up by, the drought was mitigated by some winter rains for the 16 and 17 vintage, but we continued along this line of warmer, riper vintages in 16 and 17. And so 18 is really the first vintage in what is that? 7
or 6 years,
7 years that breaks that mold.
Yep.
So in 18, it's for sure the coolest vintage since 11. It was a very moderate early and middle part of the season, followed by a very cool, actually very cool final 4 to 6 weeks in Russian River Valley.
I can remember once harvest started, kind of like 19. Not as bad though, but like it was a protracted vintage. I mean, nice, evenly paced, but it was cool as we moved into
absolutely
late August, September.
Yeah, I mean, for like the last 4 weeks leading up to picking our first grapes, I don't remember ever getting above 80 degrees in Russian River Valley. So it was lots of high 60s, mid 70s, and just a very sort of soft landing for the vintage. It's great for a winemaker because it just stretches things out and it slows things down. Yeah. So to make pick decisions is that much easier. Cellar logistics are that much easier. It's a more relaxed way to harvest, and you can really spend more time on those sort of fine grained details than you can in a more hectic harvest.
Yeah. Talk about the 18 Russian River Chardonnay, kind of the vineyards that go into it, the general, like, here's how it's made. Fruit comes in and this is what happens, and then it's bottled at what point?
So like you say, we in this ongoing process of getting better, less but better.
Yep.
We're at this point, in 18, we've really decided what we think are the A+ sites, and that's really all we're working with now.
Yep.
We've let go anything that doesn't meet that criteria. So this wine, as you say, is a blend of, it's a barrel selection from our estate.
Yep. Which is where I should have said at the very beginning, we're kind of broadcasting today from our estate on West Side Road.
So we have Chardonnay planted on the estate here, El Diablo Vineyard, which is farmed by Ulysses Valdez Jr. across the river, across the Russian River. We're looking at it right now. Of course, a Ritchie Vineyard, which we make a vineyard designate of. A few barrels making from there. And Banfield, which is another, basically a state vineyard for us. We farm that vineyard even though we don't own it anymore. So it's those four. Mm-hmm. And the wine, of course, is treated the same as our single vineyard wines.
Yep.
We're harvesting cold grapes in the early morning, pressing whole cluster in a dedicated Chardonnay press. It's a long press cycle. It's what we call a champagne press cycle, meaning it's about a 5-hour press cycle at very low pressure. So we're getting very high quality juice, low solids, meaning not a lot of phenolics in the wine. So we never want to have to tinker with the wine. We never want to have to fine it to take care of any of these rough edges or phenolic qualities. Yep. So it's important to get it right at the beginning in the press. Basically, and it's, again, back to minimalism. That juice is collected in a press pan and put directly into barrels,
right,
where it stays for the next 12 months without being touched, right, for the most part. All the wines are all the Chardonnays are barrel fermented. Of course, native yeasts only, so we're not inoculating, we're not adding any winemaking products of any kind, we're not adjusting, it's a very, what I think of as an artisanal approach. Mm-hmm. I can't say natural anymore because that word's been co-opted by
natural winemakers.
No, but it's a very old school maybe approach, using, of course, Burgundian shaped barrels from Burgundy, and it's a long process because the native yeasts are quite fragile.
Yep.
They're nowhere near as robust as these engineered yeasts that are available today. So wines can take very often up to a year to ferment dry. At that point, the wines are racked to stainless steel.
Yep.
So they spend an additional 6 months in stainless.
I think one of the interesting things to maybe address, because this is also for the Pinot Noirs, I could go on, we could talk forever about this, but some of these, like these artisanal old school approaches where it's a very cold, long primary fermentation, you said about a year, it's racked to barrel, no fining, no filtering. Our use of oak it always shocks people. So we're really the Appalachian wines tend to be in like the 10 to 15% new, where the single vineyard wines tend to be in about the 20, maybe 30%, but 20 to 25% new. So not a lot of new oak, really, really good oak. So we could talk a lot about yeast and fermentations. We talk a lot about barrels, but something that has come up more recently that I think is pretty interesting is the conversation about sulfur. And I think that's one, don't spend too much time just because we don't have it, but like kind of your evolution on application, amounts of sulfur, cold cellars, and how that prolongs things, and really how we really are, all joking aside, when you talk about natural winemaking, almost as natural as wine can be made, including super minimal amount of sulfur in the process of all this.
Yeah, it's for sure one of the main, speaking back to like kind of our discussion of evolution, one of the benefits of now being in the new winery that we built here on the property is really increased control over cellar temperature, for example. At this point we're able to keep, partially because the cellars are dug into the side of the hill, and there's just an ambient, year-round, cool environment in there. But then, of course, with the added ability to actively cool the cellars, we run a very cold cellar year-round now. Typically around 53 degrees Fahrenheit. Right. So, if anything,
which is very cool.
If anything, that's
standards.
Yeah, that's extended this sort of slow, gradual process that we already were using. So, for both Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, the process has been sort of slowed down and extended. For Chardonnay, like I said, it's not uncommon for the wines to take an entire year to ferment dry. Right. For Pinot Noir, the same is true on a different scale. Pinot Noir primary fermentation is always a little bit faster, but then ML for sure takes longer. In fact, we've looked at in 18 is a great example where the wines, most of the wines finished ML mid to late summer.
And again, the ML is a native process as well. We're not inoculating with bacteria to promote ML. Right. It just naturally occurs, but in a really cold cellar, where a lot of times, especially if you're inoculating, you could be through primary and ML by Christmas.
Right.
A lot of times we haven't seen ML going dry until May, June, and we're looking to bottle in late July into early August.
Right. So yeah, 18 is a good example. The first year in the new winery, and we really wanted to extend ML. And we achieved that for sure. So I think we added sulfur one time to the Pinot Noir,
which is right before bottling at that point.
Right before bottling. Right. So for us, it's an amazing tool. Everything about it I love. I think it makes the wines that much more fresh, energetic. Of course, sulfur levels are quite a bit lower because we've only added sulfur that one time before bottling. So freshness is increased. I think ageability is increased. It's a great direction, I think, for the Pinot Noir in particular.
Okay, so I think we maybe 5 minutes to go. If you don't mind, just a little bit, let me pour you some of the Pinot Noir as well. So that was 2018 Russian River Chardonnay. Production on that, less than 1,000 cases of wine. It's those 4 vineyards blended together. It is such a beautiful, beautiful wine. What I love about Matt's style, what I love about that particular wine is you find this incredible tension. It's almost not what you think from the Russian River Valley. You're thinking on the Pinot and the Chard, you're thinking more fruit, more generous, kind of rich and broad, but there's this awesome tension in that Chardonnay, this great, fresh, natural acid that like carries it all the way through. But you've got the fruit, the richness of what California Chardonnay is known for and what it should be without being excessive. And it's a great balancing act that we have in that Chardonnay. Pinot Noir, same concept, off the estate, as well as our single vineyard Russian River wines.
Yeah, absolutely. We make a few more vineyard designated Pinot Noirs than we do Chardonnay, so there's a few more vineyards in the mix here. But again, as you say, it's all barrel selection from vineyards that we are also making vineyard designates from.
Yep.
There are no second or third tier vineyards going into this blend to kind of bump it up. It's all our A plus sites. Of course, Pinot Noir is made differently. We are destemming most of the fruit,
Yep.
so typically 70 to 100% of the fruit is destemmed, depending on vintage and site. One of the things that we've been working on for years and years now is really honing in on which sites do we like whole cluster with,
Right.
which sites do we like fully destemmed with. Trial after trial of that, sort of my very meticulous and slow approach to bringing those processes into a commercial
And I'll
scale,
say you guys will begin to notice that in the 18 vintage and certainly the 19 vintage is it took about 6 or 7 years of kind of internal trials and blending and experimenting to get there to a point where we were basically always fully destemmed, no stem inclusion, to I think in 18 and 19 you're beginning to see small amounts, anywhere from like 0 up to about 15% probably, depending on the vintage. You'll see a little bit of the stem inclusion in.
Yeah, so 18, the Russian River, this wine is probably about 5% whole cluster.
Uh-huh.
Some of the single vineyards are up to 10%.
Yep.
And then 19 was kind of this perfect opportunity to push it a little more.
Yeah.
Vintage wise, it was another cool long vintage.
Yep.
With, again, great conditions for whole cluster. So in 19, for example, we're probably looking at more like 10 to 30%
Okay.
Whole cluster across the range.
Yep.
But yeah, it's something that we've really looked at to help aromatically, used properly. I think it really frames aromatics so well
Yeah.
in Pinot Noir, and also in the right vintages in the right setting. It's great for texture as well.
And I think you talk about kind of as you peel things back, and you don't want to be distracted. It doesn't need to be something that's taking your eye off the focus of the wine, but if it's something that really can complement the wine, add a natural element of intrigue, then that's kind of what our aim is to do with stem inclusion. So
For sure.
thank you, man. Thanks for being here, the time to visit. I appreciate all of you guys tuning in. We appreciate all of the support that you all show us out in the market. The same thing to the Wilson Daniels sales team. It's a treat to get to work with you guys. We're very thrilled to have the 18s in the market. For us, we got to make a little bit more in 18 and even a little bit more in the 19 vintage. So I know that certain wines and certain times of the year, it gets a little thin. Bear with us. We're doing our best to try to grow to kind of meet that demand. We're really excited about that. So thank you all. We appreciate you tuning in, and we look forward to seeing you actually out in the market and not just through Instagram Live. So thanks a lot.
Thanks, everybody.